Dance. Way you move is a mystery. What's up, everybody? My name's Bimler, and I'm doing something a little different today. Instead of doing an album review, I am doing a ranked video. I am ranking all of the albums from a certain artist's discography. Today, we're doing Tame Impala. This is the first time I'm doing one of these, so how it's going to work is kind of how you would expect. I'm going to go over his albums, in my opinion, from worst to best. I'm going to give them a little bit of a review along the way, and a sort of rough rating. Generally, for these kinds of videos, I don't plan on doing all of the albums in depth on their own at any points. At some point, I probably will do at least one of these records as a full review, but until that point, take the ratings I give them in these videos as my ratings for the records. Without further ado, let's get started. In my opinion, at the number 4 spot, the worst Tame Impala album, it's Innerspeaker. I don't like saying it's Innerspeaker because it's the debut and there's a lot of early Tame Impala-ness about this record that gives it a lot of charm. When it gets psychedelic, it really gets psychedelic. Think tracks like Alter Ego, with that amazing instrumental opener and some fantastic vocals from Kevin Parker. But just generally, I think this album's biggest problem is consistency. As much as I enjoy tracks like maybe the first 3, Expectation, Jeremy Storm, Runway Houses, City Clouds, there's also a few tracks on this record I don't really care for as much. I'm not the biggest Solitude is Bliss fan. I know it's the big song, but I just don't personally care for it that much. I'm also not really a big fan of The Bold Arrow of Time, or The Closer, I don't really mind. Not to discount any of this record's highlights, though. I do love, like I said before, the song Alter Ego. It's beautifully produced, especially for this record, where I can find production on it can be a little lackluster. And I also love, I shouted it out earlier, the song Jeremy Storm, which is an instrumental break towards the middle of the record. I don't know what it is about this song. It just scratches an itch for me, and I really like it. I don't know. This record just, it's good, but it's not as good as anything else Tame Impala's made since. If I had to give it a quick rating, I'd probably give it a B-. It's a fine record. Coming in at the number 3 slot, we have The Slow Rush, the most recent album from Tame Impala, which I guess is kind of poetic. You know, you got the earliest one and the latest one. And the concept this album follows is really interesting to me. The whole following a year. It has 12 tracks that correspond with the 12 months. I don't know how many people actually talk about that, but it's really cool. For example, a lyric off of my personal favorite song on the record, On Track, which is track 7, says, "I know it's nearly August." Track 7 would make On Track July, which is nearly August. Generally, I think this one's also a little bit less consistent than maybe the other 2 records I have yet to talk about. It's definitely a step up from Innerspeaker. I think the production on this is fairly clean most of the time. It can lack a bit of oomph when it could use it at times. For example, the song Instant Destiny, which I really don't know what it is. The song just doesn't really hit as hard as I feel like it should for me, especially with the upbeat and kind of wild feeling the song's trying to go for thematically. Other shoutouts on this album, I mentioned On Track before as my favorite, but I also really like the opener, One More Year. Real psychedelic vibes from the song. Great way to set up the album and contrast the outro, One More Hour, which is also a pretty great song. I also love Posthumous Forgiveness. That song is incredibly heavy and really shows Kevin's maturity in terms of looking back on his relationship between him and his father, and definitely has tugged at my heartstrings before. Borderline is an obvious and undeniable banger that just generally has some of the best sounds on the whole record. The chorus is memorable as hell, the pan flute goes hard, and I also love Is It True? The drums on that song are so fun. And also It Might Be Time. That song's pretty fun as well. If I had to give this album a rating, I'd give it a B+. I actually really like The Slow Rush. I can't tell whether it's over or underrated because I feel like I hear the equal amount of people saying it's kinda bad as I do saying it's really good. So I'm just gonna say I like it, and we'll move on. And the top 2 for this video kept me awake at night, basically, because I, to this day, can't decide which of these 2 albums I like more. I like these 2 albums for such different reasons. I think one of them is so much more fleshed out, well-produced, thematically cohesive, while the other is more exciting and emotionally compelling and varied in its sound, for better and I guess for worse as well. But after a lot of thinking about it, number 2, I have to give number 2 to Lonerism. And I hate doing that because it's probably my personal favorite of his discography, but we'll get to Currents. In terms of Lonerism, I absolutely adore this record. Its themes of isolation and loneliness kind of contrast the more Solitude is Bliss approach of the debut album, Innerspeaker. And I love it for that. It really shows a sign of change in Kevin Parker, just as a songwriter and a person as a whole. This album has some undeniably amazing songs on it, straight off the rip, with songs like Endors-toi, I think that's how you pronounce it, and Apocalypse Dreams, the latter of which, Apocalypse Dreams, is one of the best songs Tame Impala's ever written. The switch up towards the end of the track is absolutely phenomenal, and the lyric writing on the song just perfectly sums up the themes of the record, and especially the song itself. Feeling like everything around you is changing while you can't seem to move at all and go anywhere, or do anything that matters. It's a really cool song, and I absolutely adore it. Other tracks that stand out to me on this record, I love Music to Walk Home By. Arguably my favorite song on the record. It's the coolest sounding in my opinion. Oh, it's such a vibe, and totally, in my opinion, feels like the entire purpose of the record and what it's going for. It feels like this sort of psychedelic, lonely sort of wandering trip. And it's a really great song. There's the obvious hit of Feels Like We Only Go Backwards, which I think is kind of middle of the road for the record, but is kind of an undeniable classic at this point, and for good reason. The chorus is definitely an earworm, and it definitely stands out as one of the most memorable tracks on the record straight off the get-go, at least until you get into the more deep cuts on the record. For example, I love the song Nothing That Has Happened So Far Has Been Anything We Can Control. That's a mouthful, and it's a fantastic song. The instrumental breakdown towards the end of it are absolutely amazing. The little break the song takes towards the start with the spoken word bit from some other person at supposedly an event of some kind, just really adds to the sort of spacey feeling of the song. It's both a relaxing moment and a fearful and sort of lamenting one. In terms of complaints on the record, I guess it's less consistent than Currents is. I'm not the biggest fan of the closer, mainly just because I feel like it kind of lets the album peter out, especially after the banger that is the previous track, which I'm not saying the title of again. Also, as much as Elephant is a classic Tame Impala song, it just doesn't really do it as much for me. It kind of stands out in a bad way on the record, but it is kind of cool in what it does. If I have to give Lonerism a rating, I would probably give it an A+. I think it's a phenomenal record. It's bordering on an S- for me. It's great. I guess that only leaves us with one more album, doesn't it? Currents is my favorite Tame Impala album. He goes from a more raunchy psych rock direction to a much more psych pop kind of direction. I think he absolutely nails it. The more dancey and floaty grooves on this record really work, especially on songs like Yes, I'm Changing and The Moment, as well as, in my opinion, Tame Impala's best song, Let It Happen. I bet you haven't heard that take anywhere. Well, guess what? A lot of people believe it for good reason. The song is an absolute journey with one of his best messages ever, and also that awesome guitar riff towards the end of the song. You probably know which one I'm talking about. You've seen it in the Sigma Male edits. As well as generally introducing the album in a fantastic way. The whole album goes through a sort of breakup and sort of reuniting of people. I really love this album. It's done a lot for me, and even on a musical standpoint, I think it's absolutely fantastic. Other highlights on the record, Eventually is a really great song with a lot of awesome switch-ups. Even though The Less I Know The Better is not my favorite on the record, it's an undeniable classic, and definitely earns its right to be such with that insanely memorable guitar riff. But shout out to the track that follows it, Past Life. I don't hear this track getting enough love. It's very different for the album, but I think it gives a really nice switch-up where the album needs it. Another favorite for me, though, has to be Disciples. I love the bounciness of this track. Also, that one synthesizer sounds like a cat. Re-listen to it, you won't be able to unhear it. It sounds like the cat keyboard, you know what I'm talking about? Also, the closer, New Person, Same Old Mistakes, another great song. Really cool way to wrap up the record. Kind of an underrated closer, as it feels less closery than maybe something like One More Hour or Sun's Coming Up. But in general, I think it's a nice, really epic way to end the album thematically. Especially with the switch up towards the end of the track. In general, Currents is one of the best produced albums I've ever heard, and has a really nice and compelling message, is remarkably consistent, and just barely outdoes its predecessor in my opinion. I would give this album an S-. I think it's great. But yeah, that's my ranking for Tame Impala. If you guys want to share yours and your reasons why, please do so in the comments down below. Like the video if you like it, subscribe if you want to see more, and hit the bell to know when that more comes out. I plan on doing more videos like this fairly sporadically, along different album reviews and other videos, trying to diversify my content a little bit. And over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be trying to flesh things out on the channel. both aesthetically and formatically. Formatically? Is that a word? But yeah, stay tuned for some of that, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.